Wow. Uh, Talk about a wake-up call.
Mm.
We're diving into this accidental bombing in South Korea, right? Two KF-16s fighter jets dropping live bombs on a civilian area. Thankfully, no one was killed. But the
Mm.
ripple effects of this are huge, international relations military strategy.
Yeah, it really is striking how this one event during a routine training exercise,
Hmm.
kind of exposed so many vulnerabilities in the
Yeah.
precarious situation on the Korean Peninsula.
Right, you got these powerful jets, KF-16s, basically the workhorses of the South Korean Air Force dropping 8 Mk-82 bombs, each packing over 500 pounds of explosives.
Yeah.
Not exactly the kind of fireworks you want going off near a civilian area,
Yeah.
especially with tensions already so high with North Korea.
And the timing couldn't be worse,
Right.
right? This happened just days before Freedom Field, the largest joint military exercise between the U.S. and South Korea,
Right.
designed to simulate a response to North Korean aggression. Of course, North Korea sees this as a direct threat, and they've already issued some pretty strong warnings.
So how do you think this incident will play into North Korea's hands? I mean, they're not exactly known for letting things like this slide.
No, this is pure propaganda gold for them.
Yeah.
They'll likely exploit this to push their narrative of a hostile South Korea and U.S., potentially even using it to justify their own military buildup.
Uh-huh.
We've seen them do this in the past with similar incidents, amplifying the threat to their people and using it to solidify internal control.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. It's not just external pressures either. What about the internal fallout within South Korea?
Oh, absolutely. Public trust in the military has taken a serious hit, and people are demanding answers. Protests have erupted, calling for a thorough investigation and accountability. The South Korean government has already suspended all live fire exercises and training flights nationwide,
Oh, wow.
which will have a direct impact on Freedom Shield.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Won't the suspension throw a wrench in their plans, especially since Freedom Shield is meant to be a demonstration of their combined military might?
Absolutely. Lee Il-woo, a defense analyst with the Korea Defense Network, warns that this suspension, if it continues, could significantly disrupt the exercise, especially the early stages that focus on testing operational plans and coordinating U.S. reinforcements.
So, what has the investigation uncovered so far? Any clues as to how something like this could even happen?
Well, initial findings point to pilot error. Apparently, one of the pilots entered the wrong coordinates for the bombing site.
Wait, they input the coordinates manually. That seems like a pretty big vulnerability in the system, especially given the potential consequences. I mean, this is high-tech military equipment we're talking about. You'd think there would be multiple safeguards in place.
You would think so, right? And that's where the details about the pilots get interesting. They were experienced overall, but relatively new to flying KF-16s.
Ah, so maybe they weren't as familiar with the specific systems or protocols of this particular aircraft. Could that have contributed to the mistake?
It's definitely a possibility that investigators will be looking into. And this brings up a broader point about the complexity of modern warfare and the constant potential for human error,
Right.
even with highly trained personnel and advanced technology.
It's kind of a chilling thought, isn't it, that even in a controlled training environment, mistakes like this can happen, makes you wonder about the potential for even bigger errors in a real-world combat situation where the stakes are infinitely higher.
Exactly. And that's why this seemingly isolated incident has such far-reaching implications. It forces us to confront the delicate balance between the need for realistic training and the inherent risks involved.
Speaking of risks, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the political fallout. We know President Trump has been critical of the cost of these joint military exercises in the past and even canceled one after his first summit with Kim Jong-un. So how do you think this bombing will factor into his stance on these exercises going forward?
That's the million-dollar question. Some might think this incident gives him more reason to scale back U.S. involvement, right?
Right.
Especially if there are concerns about preparedness and the potential for further mishaps.
Right, it could be seen as a waste of resources or even needlessly provocative to North Korea.
But on the flip side, we have experts like Lee Il-woo suggesting that Trump now understands South Korea's strategic importance, especially in relation to China and the broader Indo-Pacific region, which has become increasingly important in terms of global trade and security.
Okay, so you're saying the Indo-Pacific region, basically the vast maritime area stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Western Pacific Ocean is a key factor here, and South Korea, with its location and alliances, plays a significant role in maintaining stability in this region, which directly impacts U.S. interests.
Precisely, and given the rising tensions between the U.S. and China, it seems unlikely that Trump would want to downsize the drills and potentially weaken that strategic partnership.
But even if Trump doesn't use this incident as an excuse to pull back, Wouldn't there be pressure from within South Korea to scale back the exercises, considering the public outcry and the potential for accidents hitting a little too close to home?
That's certainly a valid point, and that's where it gets really interesting.
Because we're not just talking about military strategy anymore, right? We're talking about public perception, political maneuvering, and the delicate balance of maintaining a strong alliance while also addressing, legitimate concerns about safety and accountability.
It's a complex equation for sure, and it's one that's going to play out on multiple levels, both domestically within South Korea and on the international stage.
So let's go back to that investigation for a moment. We've talked about the pilot error and the possibility of unfamiliarity with the KF-16 systems, but what other factors might investigators be considering what else could have contributed to this incident?
Well, one thing they'll be looking into is the communication protocols during the exercise. Was there a breakdown in communication between the pilots and ground control? Were there any issues with the equipment used to transmit coordinates or target information?
I'm imagining something like a mislabeled map or a garbled radio transmission that could lead to those coordinates being off by just enough to cause a major disaster.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology itself, but also the human factor. Were the pilots fatigued? Were they under undue pressure to perform even seemingly minor things like stress or lack of sleep can affect judgment and reaction times, especially in high-stakes situations?
That's a good point. We often think of these pilots as almost superhuman, but they're still human rights subject to the same limitations and vulnerabilities as anyone else. And those limitations become magnified when you're dealing with complex machinery and split-second decisions.
Precisely. And this incident really underscores the importance of training protocols and safeguards that account for human error. It's not just about teaching pilots how to fly the plane, but also about creating a culture of safety and vigilance that minimizes the risk of mistakes, no matter how small they may seem.
Because, as we've seen, even a small mistake can have catastrophic consequences, especially when you're dealing with live ammunition. It makes you think about all those near misses that we never hear about, the ones that thankfully don't make headlines, but could just as easily have gone wrong.
It's a sobering thought, and it really raises the question of whether the current training procedures are rigorous enough, whether there's enough emphasis on preventing human error, not just reacting to it after the fact.
And this ties back to the broader discussion we were having about the future of joint military exercises, because if an accident like this can happen during a training exercise, what does that say about the potential for even bigger mistakes during an actual conflict?
It's a valid concern, and it's one that policymakers and military leaders will need to grapple with as they weigh the risks and benefits of continuing these large-scale exercises.
Because on the one hand, you need realistic training to maintain readiness and deter potential adversaries. But on the other hand, you're also increasing the risk of accidents and potentially escalating tensions with North Korea. It's a tightrope walk for sure.
And this incident has thrown a spotlight on just how delicate that balance is. It's forced everyone to reevaluate the assumptions and calculations that go into these decisions.
So let's talk about those calculations a bit more. We've discussed the impact on the Freedom Shield, exercised the potential for North Korean propaganda, and the internal fallout within South Korea. But what about the broader geopolitical implications? How might this incident reshape the dynamics in the region, particularly when it comes to the U.S.-South Korea alliance?
That's where things get really interesting, because
Yeah.
this incident has the potential to affect the alliance in a few different ways.
Okay, so we're talking about the U.S.-South Korea alliance and how this bombing incident could impact things. What are some of the potential scenarios here?
Well, on one hand, it could actually strengthen the alliance. Shared adversity can sometimes bring countries closer together.
Hmm.
This incident might prompt the U.S. and South Korea to kind of reassess their joint training procedures, enhance communication and coordination, and ultimately emerge with an even stronger partnership.
So kind of like a we're in this together, let's fix it together mentality. But wouldn't there also be pressure within South Korea to pull back from these large-scale exercises, especially given the public safety concerns?
Absolutely, and that's where things get tricky. If South Korea starts pushing for a reduction in joint military activities, it could create friction with the U.S., especially if those reductions are perceived as undermining the alliance's deterrence capabilities.
And wouldn't that play right into China's hands? They've been trying to assert their dominance in the region, and a weakened U.S.-South Korea alliance would certainly work to their advantage.
Exactly. It's a complex geopolitical chess game, and this incident has the potential to shift the pieces in unpredictable ways.
So where does this leave us? What are some key takeaways for our listener, things they should be thinking about as they follow this story?
I think the biggest takeaway is a reminder that even in the 21st century, with all our technological advancements, human error remains a critical factor in military operations. This incident underscores the importance of robust training, clear communication, and a constant focus on safety protocols.
It's like that saying to err is human, but the consequences of those errors can be amplified dramatically when you're dealing with powerful weapons and geopolitical tensions.
Another key takeaway is the understanding that seemingly isolated events can have far-reaching consequences. This bombing wasn't just a local incident. It has the potential to impact international relations, military strategy, and even the balance of power in the entire region.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of the world, doesn't it? How one event can set off a chain reaction with global implications.
And finally, I think this incident serves as a reminder of the importance of critical thinking. We need to be able to analyze information from multiple sources, consider different perspectives, and form our own conclusions based on evidence and reasoned arguments.
Because there's a lot of noise out there, especially when it comes to issues like this. We need to be able to cut through the propaganda and the sensationalism to get to the heart of the matter.
Exactly. And that's where the value of a deep dive like this comes in. By exploring the nuances, the different angles, and the potential consequences, we can develop a more informed understanding of the world around us.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a question to ponder. Given the inherent risks of military training and the potential for accidents, how can countries strike that delicate balance between maintaining readiness and ensuring safety, especially in a region as volatile as the Korean Peninsula? It's a tough question, but one that deserves our attention as we move forward.
It certainly does, and the answers will likely shape not only the future of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, but also the broader security landscape in the region and beyond.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to contemplate those broader implications. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the accidental bombing in South Korea. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.